Good evening, everyone. I'm Hannah Kay, and welcome to the inaugural Parallax debate. First of all, a very big thank you to our distinguished panel for joining us this evening, and thank you to all of you for leaving behind your screens, your sofas, your safe silos, and coming out to a real debate. Because at Parallax Debates, we believe that debate isn't about scoring points or slanging matches. We believe it's about the civilized exchange of different viewpoints, with assumptions challenged and sometimes a slight shift in perception, which is, after all, the meaning of the word parallax. Now, before we start, I want to flag up our next debate. That's happening here at the RGS on July the 14th. The motion is Trump 2.0 will make the world a safer place. And I'm delighted to let you know that we have Michael Gove defending the motion, former Tory cabinet minister and now editor of The Spectator magazine. And he's going to be going head-to-head with the journalist and broadcaster Mehdi Hasan. If you don't know Mehdi, he's a leading voice on the progressive left, both here and in America. And you can sum up his debating style by the title of his latest book, which is Win Every Argument. You can find details of that one on the How to Academy debate website, or just search for Parallax Debates. But now I'm delighted to hand over to our chair. If you don't know her face, you will certainly know her voice from her many years presenting Radio 4's Today programme and these days, The World at One. Please give a very warm welcome to Sarah Montague.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and what a delight to be here at the very first Parallax debate. Welcome them in. High immigration is good for Britain. Well, it's as if Hannah planned it. To debate immigration this week, a week in which it's become clear which side the government is on. The Prime Minister set out tougher rules for anyone moving here, whether for work, family or study, as we know, on Monday. And the aims of that are to bring net migration down by 2029. His argument that higher immigration hadn't helped growth and that the rules were necessary to prevent us becoming an island of strangers. Now, such tough language and a tightening of rules is relatively new territory for Keir Starmer, but we all know it fits with the broader political direction of the past few years. Not least since, despite tough language from the last government, net immigration rose to nearly 1 million in the year to June 2023. Presumably one of the reasons behind the success of Reform UK. Now, we are going to dive into the debate. I'm just going to run through the plan because I think it's worth it. What I would like you to do, while I'm telling you the plan, is to point your phones at this, because in a minute we're going to have a vote. In fact, that will probably take you to the vote. But while you are sorting that out, first thing we are going to do while you're sorting that out is have that vote in a minute on that motion. Then we're going to hear from each of our speakers. I'll introduce them in turn. They're going to go to the lectern. They're going to speak for 10 minutes. I'm going to be a complete fascist about timing. We've got an enormous clock here, so they have no excuse. I'll be clinking my glass to go past. Actually, I'll clink my glass at 9 minutes, guys, and then I'll clink it absolutely madly at 10 to stop you. We'll hear from all four. We'll have a discussion in the room. I'll let you know the results of the vote before we go into that debate. Do come up if you want to. Get closer. Get your QR code. And then we'll have, after that debate, and we'll get the microphones out to get whoever wants to contribute to the debate, and then we'll have a summing up before a final vote to see if you have changed your perspective on this question. So I'm assuming that that has taken you to a question, and have you answered that question? It's going really well. There's no Wi-Fi. Password. Can somebody tell me the password?
It is 2025
Is this a joke?
No. The Wi-Fi network is RGS. I logged on before. The Wi-Fi network is the RGS one, just RGS. There's two, but one is RGS. And the password, I'm fairly sure, is 2025 RGS MAY, May.
Listen,
all in capitals.
We're going old school. Yes. We're going old school, and we're going to go for a show of hands. Okay? So, let's. Oh, how is that possible? Oh no. Right. Let's have, on the motion, welcome them in, high immigration is good for Britain. Would you raise your hand if you are in favour of that? But I'm going to give you a don't know option as well. But for those who think high immigration is good for Britain, thank you. Now, if you think it is, you completely disagree with that, or you disagree with it, please raise your hand. And don't knows. Okay. So clearly, we have a lot of people in favour of immigration in the room. We have a lot of don't knows, and we have a few who are not, who don't think high immigration is good for Britain. So we might see if we can sort out the Wi-Fi or something, and Kathy, you can get a message to me. Let's get into the debate and see if positions change on this. Because we are going to hear from our first speaker. And he is in favour of the motion. He's a professor of economics and public policy at King's College London. His research concentrates on the economic implications of Brexit and on immigration and labour mobility. He's the author of What Do We Know and What Should We Do About Immigration? Please welcome Jonathan Porters.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction, and welcome, everyone. So let me start what I'll be arguing for. Not high immigration as such. I think that's slightly vague and difficult to define. I'd also note that, as Sarah said, migration in the year to June 2023 was about 1 million. We'll have figures next week on what migration was in the calendar year 2024. It will show an absolutely enormous fall from that 1 million. We already know that from the data that's already been published. But that's not in itself good or bad. What I'll be arguing for is the case for an open, liberal, and flexible immigration policy. Let me start, and I'm an economist, so my section will mostly be about the economics. The case for liberal migration is, in economic terms, broadly the same as the case for free trade. Like free trade, migration is win-win. The same logic of the great British economists Adam Smith and David Ricardo on trade applies to movements of people. The commentating class here, and I suspect the majority of this audience, rightly ridicules Trump's views on the economic benefits of tariffs, not just as sort of misguided or wrong, but obviously mad or stupid. And politicians who claim we'd be better off with zero or very, very restricted migration should broadly be afforded the same treatment as Trump on that. As with trade, though, we do need to make the empirical case based on the facts. So let's set out what we do and we don't know. For the UK specifically, what are the impacts of migration on growth, on tax and spending, and on jobs? First of all, growth. Obviously, migration boosts growth. No one denies that. It boosts the size of the economy as well as the size of the population. Doesn't make it richer on average. In the short term, that is basically driven by three things. Whether migrants are more likely to be of working age, if so, whether they're more likely to be working, and their earnings. And here there's a huge amount of misinformation. If you believe the Telegraph or some so-called think tanks, or indeed the white paper published on Monday, then recent migration has been overwhelmingly of people who are low-paid, low-skilled, and or so-called dependents who are most likely not to be working. This is bullshit. We have actual hard data from HMRC, the tax authority, on both employment and earnings. Over the past few years, The number of people who've come here recently from outside the EU has risen, who are employed in this country, has risen by nearly 2 million. The proportion in work has gone up substantially. New migrants are very likely to be of working age and very likely to be in work, certainly more so than people who are born here. What about wages or earnings? Migrants from outside the EU are paid on average more than natives, and over the last year, their pay has grown faster. If you believe that most new migrants are either not working at all or very low paid, the statistics I've just quoted to you would be literally impossible. But to repeat, these are the actual hard data on earnings and tax covering all those who've recently arrived in the UK on whatever visa they've arrived, skilled work visa, student visa, dependent visa, and so on. So perhaps the most interesting thing about the white paper this week, I thought, was that it didn't show a single chart on the employment and earnings of recent migrants, despite the fact that this is published government data. Indeed, there was some very good and interesting Home Office research on this topic that was published the same day, which had a chart showing some of what I've just said. It's not in the white paper, and I think we can all guess why. So if the other side want to explain why the HMRC tax records covering, as I said, the entire population population are wrong, they're welcome to. But if you can't, you can safely assume that everything they say on this topic is nonsense. That's up to them. What about tax and spending? This follows pretty obviously from what I've just said. In the short term, more migrants of working age earning average or better wages on average, and of course some migrants are less than average, some are more than average, but we're talking about the whole thing, the whole population, and remember, they also cost somewhat less on health and pensions because they're of working age and largely are not much of a burden on the NHS or the pension system. It's good for the Treasury, and hence it's good for the rest of us. This is why the Office of Budget Responsibility has consistently said that no matter which way you look at it, short-term or long-term, higher migration reduces the deficit. This is simply what the data says. It's not rocket science. If the other side want to claim that's wrong, they need to explain what the OBR has got wrong about what the migrant population overall on average is actually earning, what they're taking out in public services and so on. What about the longer term? Here things are more fuzzy, and I think there is much more scope for legitimate debate and disagreement. The evidence we have is pretty positive. We know that sectors in areas with higher levels of migration in the UK are more productive, and we know productivity that drives long-term growth. There is a serious debate about this among economists, however. It's essentially those between migration who think migration is moderately positive for productivity growth over the medium to long term, and those who think it's, like me, that it's very positive. But I agree there's plenty of scope for the debate here. So, before I finish, I do want to say something about debate and what debate means. And I know this is billed as a debate, but there's some things it's not helpful debate, and there are a couple of reasons why I'm focusing particularly on a couple of things that Matt said recently. But let me give you an example. Last year on GB News, Matt said, I'm quote, and this is a direct verbatim quote, you can check it, "Do you know that more than 50% of social housing in London is occupied by people who are not British? It is not acceptable for any modern society to be relegating its own citizens," end quote. In fact, that 50% figure refers to people who were born abroad. The vast majority of those people are British, and they have been so for a long time. Some of them are people who arrived in the Windrush. Some are people who, like my own parents, arrived here on work visas in the 1960s. Some are people who arrived in the 1970s as refugees, and so on and so forth. This is not in dispute at all. The data isn't from the census. Matt just got it wrong. He knows it. Fine, it happens. It's what happens next that I think illustrates what happens to some of the debate on this topic, and why it's hard to debate sometimes people like Matt or those who write about immigration in the Times, Telegraph, or Spectator. Multiple people told Matt was wrong and showed him the data. It's from the census again. But rather than admit that he got it wrong, he doubled down. A few months later, Mehdi Hassan confronted him with the data face-to-face, data he'd already seen, And he simply said, I haven't seen that, I need to look at the data. Then he wrote a column which is entitled, quote, I'm not wrong, which, again, failed to acknowledge his error or to correct his error. Instead, he claimed that he had not said what he'd actually said. And I'll just repeat again what he'd said. I've got, yeah, 1 minute. Do you know that more than 50% of social housing in London is occupied by people who are not British? It is not acceptable for any modern society to be relegating its own citizens. And once again, those people, the vast majority of them, are citizens and have been for a long time. So Matt will throw some stats at you later. Some of them will be true, some of them will be distorted, some will not be true at all. Most of you won't know the difference. Most of you won't know the difference. But I'm not going to fact check him live. That's a Mung's debate game. You can't debate like that, and I won't. So I'll just stop there.
And Matt, you are going to get the right of reply in a few minutes' time. So we're going to move on now, though. Thank you, Jonathan. Time for our first speaker against the motion. He is a former Conservative cabinet minister, was Chancellor of the Exchequer and Education Secretary. He was born in Baghdad. His family fled Saddam Hussein to come to the United Kingdom when he was 11 and when he was unable to speak a word of English. Please welcome Nadhim Zahawi.
Thank you very much indeed. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is an absolute pleasure to be with you this evening. I am very grateful for the opportunity to discuss this topic with what I know is a thoughtful and well-informed audience. It's a topic that urgently needs discussing, not least because of the emotions that surround it on both sides of the argument, but also because the consequences for our country, to Britain, on getting this right are nothing short of existential. We are going to disagree with each other, and you may well disagree with us. But I am glad that the issue is now salient enough that we are able to discuss it at all. I won't begin by going over too much of my own story. Suffice to say that I was originally an immigrant to this country. In fact, I believe I'm the only immigrant on the panel tonight. So I hope that my presence on this side, therefore, will help to highlight that our side of the debate does not hold our opinion because of the base and low rationales with which some would try to ascribe to immigration restrictions. And it's a shame to see Jonathan attempt that just now. In fact, let me start by dispelling the silly, if trendy notion in some academic circles that racism is only something that white people do to non-white people in Western countries. It's not. I want to give people permission tonight, should they feel they need it, not to worry that the accusation is one that needs to hold weight. By way of proof, my family fled very real persecution in Iraq, where Saddam Hussein was the driving force of the Ba'ath Party, and being Kurds in an Arab nationalist socialist dictatorship, my family and I were targets. My father was warned that we were to be killed. We fled. And then we got to Britain. I had to learn to assimilate. I learned painfully at first to speak English, then to, of course, think in English and to dream in English. I learned to love football, although after the season Man U've just had, I wish that may have been different. I learned how the English take their tea and how they decorate their homes. Deeper than that, I breathed in the deep wellspring of the British character, our empiricism, our mercantile interests, our innate sense of fair play. I learned the history of the people of this island and of the island story. I came to understand the impact of Christian teaching of common law and the scientific methods, and the strange way that Brits tend to insult their closest mates whilst being scrupulously polite to those they dislike. I integrated. I assimilated. Over time, I became British. Not ethnically, of course, but culturally, socially, proudly. And so after a successful business career and serving in parliament and government, I find myself before you reflecting on the changes to the country I call home. And I find myself not recognizing so much of it. It's not about how many faces share the same pigment as mine when I walk down the street. It's about the customs some now hold, the change in interactions between new arrivals and even plenty of second generations too. Professor Goodwin will ably, I think, give you the stats about the rates of change and the qualitative data on worrying changes in attitudes. But I am here to tell you that there are a great many people who are not integrating at all. There is not the pressure on them to do so in the way that there was on me and my family, partly through the sheer volume and partly because of concerns about encouraging assimilation at all. There was not an enormous Kurdish community when we arrived in 1979, balkanized into some city in the Midlands or the north for me to slot into with slow-cooked mazgouf prepared over coals, or an ex-Peshmerga in traditional garb celebrating Nowruz in the streets. Now, though, there are pockets of Britain where there is no need to integrate at all. Indeed, integration is increasingly classified as a betrayal of family, tribe, or religion. This, my friends, is wrong. It shouldn't have to take someone with my bronze skin color to tell you this. But if it takes for me to say it, then so be it. Britain should be the British state for the British people. That will have an ethnic component to it, of course, but it doesn't need to be exclusively if people will integrate and come to love the country as I have. As far back in time, of course, of King Ethelbert, we were using Christianity and customs to forge a single polity that went past Anglo or Saxon or anything else. But the fact is that many people living on these islands don't believe themselves to be British or English at all. That is a terrible thing for the future of the nation. In the United States, at the turn of the last century, immigration was running at enormously high levels. Acts were passed in the 20s to limit it, and those who were in the US had time to integrate. There was a bureau of naturalization, and a whole Americanization project, though the federal government, schools, and other institutions. And even after all of that, there were still problems with the Italian mafia and other mobs. They still organized around old national and cultural ties, paid more obseisance to those clannish networks than the new nation. So imagine what horrors we may be storing up now with enormously large numbers of people from very different cultures coming to such large numbers and no efforts to integrate. The Baghdad I was born into bore the very deep imprint of British rule. Excellent administration and infrastructure were the main legacy, one that the Baathists, of course, eagerly destroyed. But now in Britain, the scale and speed of people coming from places where the ideas and cultures are much more different than even the Iraq I left, presents a serious challenge to integration. This is as true with legal migration as it is with illegal immigration. I'm going to go further tonight and address another elephant in the room. My family fled a murderous dictator who, whilst not a jihadi, was more than happy to wrap himself in the trappings of a violent form of Islam in order to win and hold on to power. We came to Britain to get away from such evil ideas, but unfortunately, we have since imported a great deal of barbaric, backward beliefs and worse. We do nothing to stop the spread of the most wicked jihadist ideas in Britain. You only have to look at Smile to Jannah, a YouTube channel, and more than 1 million subscribers to see the most awful da'wah preached with rampant conspiracy theories, anti-Semitic slurs, and more. When I was a minister, I would often visit mosques, and they would tell me a very different story because they thought of my background. But when they realized that I'm a Brexity right-winger, they very quickly changed their tale. I'm going to end with a quote from my friend, Abdullah bin Zayed, the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates. There will come a day when we see far more radicals, extremists, and terrorists coming from Europe because of a lack of decision-making and trying to be politically correct. That is wrong, my friends, which is why you should vote with us tonight. Thank you very much indeed.
I have been sent the Wi-Fi code. I should have let Jonathan finish because, of course, he was absolutely bang on when he said it. The Wi-Fi code, which I'm going to give you now, because when we do the vote at the end, it's probably a little bit better to have the technology doing it. It is 2025, RGS, May. Kind of obvious, as you realised, Jonathan, and I was a bit slow too. Capitals, all capitals, 2025, obviously not that. Numbers then, RGS, May, M-A-Y, all just in one row, and that should get you onto the Wi-Fi, and we will do a little vote later. But let's hear from our third speaker now, because arguing in favour of the motion, welcome them in, high immigration is good for Britain. She's an independent policy researcher and campaigner who's worked for the European Network on Statelessness, the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants, Asylum Aid, the Race Equality Foundation, and the European Council on Refugees and Exiles. She's writing a book about how immigration policy could be reimagined to work for Britain. Please welcome Zoe Gardner.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for coming along this evening and for giving me this brilliant opportunity to speak to you. I must have given that spiel about myself a good few months ago when I was more confident that I'd have found the time to write a chapter or so. I'm nowhere near writing that book, unfortunately. I'm not as prestigious as the other speakers in this debate. I'm not a professor, I don't have my own TV news show, and I've never been anywhere near running the country. As you just heard, I've spent my career working for a bunch of really small charities whose primary purpose is to deliver direct assistance to migrants of all kinds, navigating the extreme complexity and difficulties of our immigration system here in the UK and at times around Europe. That's the perspective that I'm going to bring to this today. I'm used to hearing these debates. I think we all are. Arguably, sometimes we hear a few too many of these debates. But what I see is how these highfalutin debates translate into our communities and impact real people and their ordinary day-to-day lives. It isn't pretty, and it isn't quite as blood-curdling either, I would argue, as what we just heard. Actually, I think the big takeaway that I'd like to give you is that migrants just people, no more scary than anyone else. I'd like to thank those of you who raised your hand earlier in favour of the motion. I hope I won't put you off. But respectfully, I have to say that I'm not sure I believe you. Maybe you really do think that you want high immigration, but I've worked my entire life in the migrants' rights sector, and I've never met anyone who actually specifically wanted high immigration. Most of us probably raised our hands in favour of the motion because we want to vote against the quite horrifying tide of anti-migrant sentiment that we've been seeing in recent times, because we recognise that migration is natural, that the UK needs some immigration, and that some people do need to move around the world. Because we know that good systems can manage lots of people without too many problems, and that bad systems can't manage many people at all without falling to bits and creating chaos. And if that's why you raised your hand, then I appreciate it, I really do. I don't think you raised your hand because you want high immigration, but it suits this debate to say that some of us do, right? There's got to be some of us who, for some strange reason, just really want to see how many we can pack in, right? It's like, do you remember when they used to do those Guinness World Records competitions and it was how many baked beans can you fit in a bath? Yeah, like for some demented reason, that's how I feel about this country and immigration. Because if there isn't actually anybody who's obsessed with high immigration, then we've got to explain to ourselves a little bit why this elite consensus that we've had almost unbroken for about 25 years among all the governing parties and every government and Nadhim Zahawi's government has agreed that we should be lowering immigration, and yet they don't seem to do it. Is it really that hard? Or is it me pulling the strings behind the scenes, a huge amount of power? The truth is, I can give you the secret. Nadhim Zahawi's government that he was part of could have cut migration drastically. Keir Starmer's government could cut migration drastically. You know what you do? You issue far less visas. Cat's out the bag, right? Now, no, they'll try to distract you. They'll say, look, there's asylum seekers over there on a boat. We didn't give them a visa and they're coming anyway. They don't care about the rules. And you're right. It's a fair point. It's a fair point. But asylum seekers coming over on small boats last year made up 5% of immigration to this country. The government had absolute control, full discretion, over 95% of arrivals to this country. Now, you should be very, very suspicious of anyone who's talking to you about how we need much lower immigration and then pointing at 5% of it and saying that's what you should be looking at. But we know that reducing the number of visas that we issue would be, well, pretty disastrous, wouldn't it? I mean, if we really drastically reduced the number of visas, well, we wouldn't have anybody to work in our care sector, we wouldn't have anybody picking the fruit on our farms, we would have the economic impacts and shocks that Jonathan's brilliant speech spoke to us about. So what do we do? What do we do when we've made it absolutely clear that the scapegoat for all our problems in this country are migrants, but we can't do the one simple thing to get rid of them? Well, we go after their rights instead, don't we? And that's what Brexit was about, right? We all know we supposedly voted Brexit to reduce immigration, but we got more immigration. Why? Because we still had those jobs. We still had those economic needs. But those migrants that come here now, well, they have much, much less rights. And that's what happened this week as well, Keir Starmer's Island of Strangers speech. He could have said, I'm going to cut the number of visas I issue this year to next by 50%. Done. But he didn't say that. No, he said, I'm going to remove the right of migrants who come to live and work in this country to obtain citizenship or settled status for another 5 years. I'm going to push it back for 10 years. And that's extremely convenient, isn't it? Because when migrants don't have settled status, when they have a temporary and precarious status, then their rights are far more easily abused. And most importantly, their rights in the workplace. If you're on a temporary visa here in the UK, changing your job is either not allowed at all or extremely bureaucratically difficult. Can you imagine what your boss would do with your salary if they knew that you couldn't leave your job without also leaving the country? Putting migrants in a more and more precarious situation drives down wages. It drives down wages for a more and more exploitable second-class citizen group of the population. And of course, we know that when conditions are driven down for one group, they can be pitted against one another and driven down for everybody. I always have too much to say. And I'm really glad that we're going to have a bit of discussion, and I'm looking forward to your questions. And please ask the difficult ones, they're the most fun. So that I don't go on and on now, I'm just going to wrap up and say that this conversation is never about cutting numbers. Immigration is just something that's going to happen anyway. Now, we can tinker around the edges, we can slightly reduce it here, temporarily we can slightly reduce it there, but overall, the UK has an aging population, a need for more workers, and there are people who need to move. Overall, immigration is going to fluctuate along lines that, frankly, none of these debates impact. What these debates impact are people's rights. It's whether your boss can exploit you in the workplace, whether your wages are going to rise. That's what we're really talking about here. So don't vote for high immigration, right? That's weird. Vote for a country where we respect each other's rights, where we say that people who come here need to have equal and protected rights too. Vote for saying, no, we won't give up our human rights on the basis that that might make a few more of them disappear. Vote on the basis that we will stand together and against the anti-migrant hatred, and nobody will think that you really just want to fit a few more beans in the tub. We all know that you're really voting about a respect for one another and standing together for all of our rights. So vote for us. Thank you.
Let's turn now to our final speaker, making the case against the motion. Welcome in. High immigration is good for Britain. He's a political commentator, broadcaster, best-selling author whose books include National Populism, Values, Voice and Virtue, and Bad Education, Why Our Universities Are Broken and How We Can Fix Them. His Substack letter has over 79,000 subscribers in 181 countries, making it one of the largest Substacks in the UK and globally. Please welcome Matthew Goodwin.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you for coming this evening. No, mass immigration is not good for Britain. It is bad for our country. It is an unfolding disaster. Mass immigration is bad for our economy because it's taking more out of the economy than it's putting in. It's bad for our housing crisis because it's driving up house prices and it's increasing the cost of rent. It's bad for our security because it's fueling crime, especially the sexual assault and the rape of women in this country. And it's bad for our nation, our home, because it's undermining the social integration and cohesion of our communities. It's also bad for the social contract. This week, 85% of Brits said they would like to see net migration reduced below 100,000 a year. It is currently over 700,000. If you think this is a way to maintaining a functioning, healthy democracy, I would kindly suggest you're insane. Now, if you read my newsletter, you will know that all of these things and the evidence for these claims are out there in the public domain. You haven't heard about them yet, but I'm about to share them with you. Because Keir Starmer, the Labour government, BBC Verify, pro-immigration experts, the expert class will constantly blame everybody in this country for misinformation, for disinformation. But at the same time, they are hiding from you, the taxpayer, information that you need to assess the costs and benefits of this political project. Even if you disagree with everything Nadhim and I are saying tonight, ask yourself a question. Why are they not releasing information and data so you can make up your mind about the impact of immigration on our country? We were told that mass immigration would lift all boats in society and it would drive economic growth, but it hasn't happened. Just look around. We have basically zero rates of economic growth. GDP per capita is dismal. Productivity has been declining, debt has been rocketing. No serious person would look at UK PLC and think this is working. Now, that's not all because of mass immigration, obviously, but the Bank of England, the Office for Budget Responsibility have both shown that mass immigration is undermining the wages of the working class, people who I grew up with and who people on the left used to care about in this country, people like Jonathan and Zoe. But overall, those studies show clearly mass immigration is a net fiscal cost for this country, not a benefit. The OBR finds that low-paid migrant workers will cost you, taxpayers, per migrant £150,000 by the time they retire, or £500,000 if they reach the average life expectancy. In Britain, the Netherlands, Denmark, and beyond, many studies that Jonathan will not mention to you have found exactly the same thing. Low-skill, low-wage, non-European migration, poorly educated, often forms of migration, are a net fiscal cost to Western economies. They're not a benefit. Now, we were told by politicians on both the left and the right that we would get, after Brexit, a high-skill immigration policy. Okay? Have a guess, what percentage of the more than 1 million visas that were issued in this country last year went to people who were applying for work? 22%. 1 in 5. And over the last 6 years, do you know how much of the migration into Britain from outside of Europe came for work? 16%. Now, you might quibble on the numbers and say it's 18, it's 15, it's 20. The point is, you are subsidizing a project that is taking more out of the national economy than it's putting in. You won't hear about this on the rest is Politics. You won't hear about it in the Financial Times. You won't hear about it on BBC Radio 4 Today. We have 1.6 million economically inactive foreign-born residents in this country. In recent years, you have paid £7.5 billion on universal credit payments for people who were born outside of the UK. Over the last 5 years, you paid £36 billion in financial costs for unemployed migrants and international students. And over the next decade, get ready, you are all going to pay £15 billion in hotel and accommodation costs for people who have often broken our laws. That is enough for 10 new hospitals for this country. We were also told that mass immigration would not hurt the housing sector. This too is absolutely bonkers. It's nonsense. Even the University of Oxford's Migration Observatory, which is not exactly a skeptical organization, concedes that mass immigration is driving up house prices and the cost of rent. Keir Starmer and the Labour government have just announced they're going to build 370,000 homes every year to fix our housing crisis. What they're not telling you is they need to build at least 550,000 homes every year just to deal with the previous demand from migration over the last 20 years. You can have available and affordable housing in this country for British families and British young people, or you can have mass immigration. You cannot have both of those things. Now, John talks about relegating citizens. They talk about dehumanizing language. So insane is this experiment that we are now in the absurd position of watching the British state use your money to support private companies like Serco to outbid the British people in the private housing market to favour illegal migrants who have broken our laws. Serco are giving more favourable contracts to landlords to take asylum seekers and illegal migrants than to make those properties available to hard-working, tax-paying, law-abiding British people. How is that fair? How is that right? How is that just? That is relegating citizens. That is dehumanizing. Mass immigration, too, is bad for crime, and if you tutted at what I just said, you're not reading the evidence. In fact, ask yourself, why is the state not giving you the evidence about how levels of criminality vary by immigration status and nationality? What we've had to submit freedom of information requests to the state to get this information, because it won't give it to you, even though you're tax-paying citizens. And then we hear how mass immigration is only ever beneficial. Foreign nationals are 39% more likely to be convicted of all crimes, 69% more likely to be convicted of drug crimes, 71% more likely to be convicted of sexual assault. Eritreans and Afghans are 20 times more likely than British nationals to be arrested and convicted of sexual offences and rape, which might be why sexual offences against women in this country are now at record highs. Zoe talks about rights. I have a question today. What about the rights of British people? What about the rights of British children and British women? The National Crime Agency says that serious organised crime in this country is now costing you £47 billion every year. The Director General of the Serious Organised Crime Agency says that most of that is being driven by overseas gangs, especially, but not exclusively, Albanians. And it's mass immigration that is also bad for our social contract. Just look around the country. The rise of sectarian politics at a national general election. 85 Sharia courts in this country. Reliable polls that tell us 40% of British Muslims in this country would like a Muslim-only political party. Only 1 in 4 accept what happened on October the 7th. Large numbers endorse anti-Semitic tropes. Roma riots in Yorkshire, communalism in Leicester, the mass rape of hundreds of thousands of white working-class girls, and this Labour government will not do the decent thing of pursuing truth and justice for those girls by holding a national statutory inquiry. A secondary school teacher in this country is still in hiding because they offended Islam. No-go areas for Jews. 1 million people who do not speak English in this country. The fact that more British Muslims left this country to fight for ISIS and violent Islamist sects than are currently serving in the British Army. Does this experiment seriously look to you as though it's working? Does multiculturalism look like it's working? Of course not. Zoe talks about the impact on normal people. Again, I have a question that I would like to just leave hanging in the room. What about the impact on the tax-paying, law-abiding, hard-working, forgotten majority in this country? And I'll just end with one comment. Mass immigration is also bad for the expert class, for people like Jonathan and Zoe, people who like to think of themselves as experts and who are routinely presented by the BBC and much of the legacy media as experts, because instead of acknowledging everything I've just said, what they're doing is bending the evidence and truth around their ideological priors. They are presenting a story to you that you want to hear. Many of you want to believe these things. You hold internal beliefs that lead you to want to think this project is working. Jonathan, diversity is wonderful.
You're going to need to wrap
up.
But
actually, we are the people tonight who are telling the truth, not the so-called experts. Thank you very much.
Matt. We're going to get the house lights up. I'm going to get the microphones out. But I am going to start things off because I want to know, Nadhim Zahawi, when you listen to all that Matt sets out about the horrors of mass immigration, do you recognize that your government really, successive governments, completely failed in the way they handled it, in the lack of information that they gave out for all the crimes that Matt was talking about? And, of course, allowing people coming in.
Yes, I do. And I think, actually, and I hope tonight we'll be able to convince you that if we'd chosen a different path, a much cleverer path, much smarter path of how we welcome people to our shores, then it could help with everything that we want to spend money on, our public services, whether it's the health service, defense of this country, everything else. America has just announced, and Howard Lutnick has done the modeling, that there are 37 million people that could be eligible for the American Gold Card. Right? Now they're going to charge $5 million for it, and you only get taxed for what you earn in America. If we just look at those 37 million, say we can attract 10% of them. This country is the most beautiful country on earth, the language of trade, fair play, everything else, right? But these are talented people. 10% of that, right? So 3.7 million people. You can do the maths, Jonathan, and everybody in the room, right? And we don't charge $5 million because we're a smaller economy. We charge £400,000, double what Maloney's charging in Italy, which is 200,000 euros, right? We would generate 1.48 trillion pounds for this economy.
Are you saying get more people in?
In a different way. I'm saying be selective. I'm saying get smart. Do not bring in low-skilled, right, labor into this country that is costing the country money. If we're smart about it, we can actually, even if you take 10% of the 10%, okay, right, what smart countries are doing, like the UAE, is attracting the wealth creators, the talent of this country to their country, and we're getting the low-skilled problems in our country.
I'm going to get the questions out.
Yeah.
I mean, the blue light, go for it, Zoe.
Thank you. Famously, obviously, Nadhim Zahawi and the Tory party, who were so desperate to spend on public services in the NHS, but they just couldn't do it. Whoops. Anyway, it's very interesting that you're pro bringing in the richest immigrants. It is interesting because it reflects your experience, doesn't it? The difference between you as a refugee from Iraq. And the refugees from Iraq that you and your government tried to send to Rwanda was that your dad had a lot of money, wasn't it? I mean, he could afford to pay for himself to get here on a visa with you on a plane, and he didn't have to get into one of those boats. And I think this is something really, really key, because you've got the two sides here.
You know nothing about my background. If you'd done some research, you'd know we arrived here with no money, right? And not only did we arrive here with no money...
businessman, you said.
Hold on a second. No,
well,
we arrived with zero because my father had to flee Iraq, right, with £50 in his pocket.
On a plane or on a boat?
On a plane.
With
but,
a
we
visa
had nothing.
or not?
He had nothing.
You could
don't have
afford
to
it.
listen.
That's the
you don't
difference.
Need to be, It's like you can check my background and then you can make a statement like that.
And
it's not right.
And can we not make this personal? Please?
Correct.
This is going to be a heated debate.
Thank you.
But what you're talking about is that the rich should be able to move. The richest should be able to have open borders around the world. And the poor...
So, Zoe, but can I ask you something? Because you said, look, this isn't about numbers. And I was just curious, if it's not about numbers and you recognise, what were they really voting for when they said high immigration? Who wants high immigration? Would you mind if the numbers came down?
That's not. The numbers are, I mean, no. What number do I want? I don't want a particular number. I don't care. What I care about is how we treat people once they're here, whether our systems work well, whether we have accessible routes for the people who are desperate and fleeing persecution, that they can reach us. That is what I care about. If the numbers go down...
But Jonathan, you take a slightly different position, as I understand it, because you have completely as I understand it, contradictory ideas of the costs and the benefit, because you think that migrants, you say, according to the HMRC, they earn more money, they are a benefit to the economy.
I mean, let's be quite clear. This is not, as I said, this is not something for a debate. These are just facts. If either Nadhim or Matt want to tell me that the HMRC data, which show that on average migrants from outside the EU earn more than average, that their employment rates now are higher than average, that recent migrants, that over the last year, average wage rates for those people have grown more than average, that the OBR shows that they are a net fiscal, on average, a net fiscal benefit, both in the short term and the long term. All these are simply facts. God. They are facts. If they want to tell me that those facts are incorrect, that's fine. This is all published. You can see it. You can go see the charts because I tweeted them on Blue Sky for the last 3 days. It's not rocket science, actually. It really is not. These are just facts.
Yeah. Nadhim, and then Matt, I do want you to come in here.
Yeah. I think it's actually quite good to get into this debate on what people contribute economically to the nation. And it is also a fact, Jonathan, that migrants from the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey, aged between 25 and 64, and you can check this, are almost twice as likely to be economically inactive as someone born in the UK. Earnings, and therefore, let me just finish this point, and therefore tax contributions also vary enormously. So, for example, according to the Centre for Policy Studies, Spanish migrants typically earn around 40% more than the migrants from Pakistan or Bangladesh, but roughly 35% less than the migrants from France or America. What I'm advocating is let's get smart about what we attract to our shores, because that's actually a much better, more humane immigration policy.
I'm coming out in a second, but I just want to ask, can I just ask one thing? Because one of the things that a lot of us have difficulties with on both sides of the debate is choosing stats. And there was one, Matt, that I did want to ask you about, because you referred, I think, to how many were applying, how many were economically inactive who were foreign-born. Now, if Nadhim got sick and was economically inactive, he would fall into your stats, wouldn't he? Somebody who came here at 11, who served in the government, he's in that stat that you're talking about. I mean, not, but he would be.
So I don't think it's going to be particularly... We can talk about statistics all night long, and I can talk endlessly about all the reasons that everything Jonathan has just said to you is very misleading. But I don't think that is going to be a very interesting debate for people here. Let me just start by saying, I don't think you can look at the UK economy right now after 25 years of mass migration, or from 2004, and think this economy is delivering the prosperity that you deserve as taxpayers who are going out every day, who are working, who are paying into the collective pot. My starting point is, how do we drive a prosperous economy that works for you and your families and your kids? Okay, that's the first point. Now, you were lied to because a lot of people, different political parties said, you're going to get a high-skill migration policy that is going to deliver that. It didn't work out that way. So how can we make this situation better? My view is, instead of trying to constantly fit this circle into a square and saying we have to remain committed to this model of mass immigration, which is consumption-driven, which is just throwing bodies at the economy because we don't have growth, so let's just get everybody to consume stuff. We have to break that taboo, because what you're doing at the moment is you're just supplying big business with cheap migrant labor, which is keeping their profits high and their costs low. We have to stand up to big business, and we have to stand up to the likes of Jonathan, and we have to say, I'm sorry, this isn't working for anybody in this country anymore. We need a different settlement. We need to invest in British workers. We need to develop their training and skills. We need to invest in our young people. Do you know that thousands of young British kids are rejected from medical schools every year because it's cheaper for us to import less qualified doctors from places like Pakistan and India? How is that moral? How is that right?
Okay.
How is that right? Right? All we hear endlessly is how migration is good for the NHS. But we won't talk about why we're not investing in British kids.
I suspect you're going to have
Yeah, but these are the questions.
Yeah, okay. I suspect. I would like you to keep it short. We'll start in the front here. We'll go to the gentleman behind immediately afterwards, and then I'll come over to you. Let's be polite. Go for it.
Hello, my name is Chris. 2 comments. Firstly, we talk about sexual offences, Matt.
Yeah.
Just look at the last Conservative government. How many of Nadhim's colleagues were convicted of sex? No, it's an important point. It's an important point. Catholic priests, I go to a Catholic church. No, it's important because there's a tendency. But what I do think is important that we don't we can't stigmatise certain communities. Second point.
Let's move on to your second point because I think it's more.
I agree about integration, Nadhim. I agree about integration, but again, there were cuts of 60% to English as a second language. All right. We made it much more difficult to employ people at a reasonable wage on social care. You get paid £11 an hour in Twickenham, where I live. How do you think people afford to live on that? That's why the only people prepared to do those jobs are people from abroad, Nadhim.
Okay, it was a point, not a question. Let's have the question from the gentleman behind. I'm very happy to take points, but we'll just bounce through them, which is great.
I just want to feed back on the fact that Matthews has said that since 2004 we've had massive immigration and the economy hasn't done well. I mean, he's conflating he's making correlation into causation. There's lots of things that affects the economy, not just migration. Why is migration the only thing that has affected the economy?
I said it was. I should have a right of reply to that, Sarah. Sarah, I should have a right of reply
Please
to
do.
that.
Yes, of course.
I was very clear, if you were listening to what I said that clearly mass immigration is not the only reason for why our economy is stagnating. But it is a major reason, a big reason, for why our living standards are stagnating, for why our productivity is the weakest it's been for 50 years, and why our GDP per capita has been going in the wrong direction. Now, it's great. We can all sit here and we can reject everything everybody else is saying, or we can open our minds and try and get into a different perspective. There's lots of evidence out there that shows, do one thing this evening. You can go look at Jan van der Beek's work in the Netherlands. He's shown this consistently. Western economies have lost as a result of mass immigration. Okay, it's low skill, low wage, it doesn't drive prosperity, it doesn't drive growth. So if you want to keep on this treadmill, keep on it. I mean, if that's fine, it's your choice. But it's not actually delivering us the jobs, the hospitals, the public services that you're also simultaneously complaining about.
The lady there, in the blue or purple.
Yes. This is a genuine question, no subtext, coming from someone who has worked with refugees and asylum seekers here in the UK for 10 years. I'm not challenging you. This is a genuine question I cannot answer. Do we think, or does anyone think, with hindsight, that we should have given people who came to this country 4 or 5 years ago, on a boat, by plane, claiming asylum, the right to work and start working? Because I can tell you, 5 years on, what the impact is on housing, on our economy. Many of them came really intending to keep that tenacity that drove them here going, and we killed it. COVID didn't help. So I'm not challenging you, I'm asking.
Okay, I'm going to ask each of you this. Let's imagine a world where there is very low immigration and we take some asylum seekers. Should they work immediately, Nadhim?
If they're genuine asylum seekers, then yes. My issue, and I tell you what I think the uncomfortable truth is that we need to think about tonight, is if you take anything south of Libya, right, there are about 500 million people who are going to come under pressure, whether economic pressure, social, political pressure, persecution, of course, or environmental, right? Clearly, Europe cannot absorb 500 million people.
I just want to engage
I'm going to get that.
Specific question about working.
Absolutely, I've answered it straight away, right? I opened by saying if they are genuine asylum seekers, they should be. I think we should absolutely get them into the economy. My issue is back to what we're debating tonight, right? Democracy will break down, in my view, if we remain at the levels that we are today. It's much better for us, the smart economies, the developed economies of the world, to work upstream, right? Try and fix some of these economies, some of these social issues, environmental issues in Africa, in the Middle East, because what you can't do, clearly, we can't absorb 500 million people.
Okay.
Right? It's impossible. And I think we're missing the point here.
Genuinely
We'd much better to spend our resources on that. And if we can do, you'll see what will happen in Italy, right? Meloni's welcoming more people into that country. You'll see what happens with the gold card in America, right? If we're able to imagine a world where we generate an additional 1.48 trillion a year, right, into the economy, what you can do for those migrants, for those asylum seekers.
It's a really important and brilliant question, thank you. And it goes to what I'm saying. You know, because you work with those people, there wasn't any question of them just deciding not to move. People move because they need to. It's what we've always done as human beings. And despite those terrifying numbers that promise us the end of our civilization, it's blood-curdling as heck on that side of the table. But we do know that people will continue to move. And we do know that the UK will continue to be a destination for some of those people, actually a very small proportion of those people, but some of those people will continue to come here. And the question really is, how do we manage that? How do we get the best out of that? For those people, how do we respect them as people? How do we give them the best opportunity to rebuild their lives? But how do we also make that work for our country? Because it's happening, and we can manage it well, or we can manage it badly. One of the things we should obviously do is not keep young people who are capable of working, who are capable of being trained, from working. Keep them economically inactive for an average of 2 years in the asylum system, an average, which means many people for years and years and years. It destroys people. We leave them in squalor. We leave them to become, parts of our society that we don't want, things in our society that we don't want, that don't benefit us. Uneconomically active young men, anywhere in the world, you see them around, it's not a good thing for society. In Spain, they have training programs. They match asylum seekers with industries in need of workers, and they train them up while they're in the system. Spain's economy is booming off the back of that.
And if it acted as a lure for more people because they thought I could get a job?
Well, why would it act as a lure when they already allow people to work in France and a small proportion of people still continue to cross from France? People don't know how the asylum system works. They come here because they think we're a country where there's opportunity and where there's a future for their children. That is why they come. Then they're shocked that we leave them without the right to work.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Very briefly, because I want to get some more questions
everyone else has been allowed to answer this question. We're 2 clicks away on TikTok from showing you exactly how the asylum system in this country works. There are TikTok videos, hundreds of them, that are explaining to people around the world how our asylum system works. In fact, if you even take a small boat to this country, you get a discount if you advertise your journey on TikTok. Everyone is very aware of how our system works. That if you arrive illegally, you get a house, accommodation,
so just to be clear,
cash card,
to go back to the question,
NHS,
Matt,
schooling.
So to go back to the question,
Life O'Reilly.
Imagine a world with low immigration.
Yeah.
Take some asylum seekers. Should they be able to work?
a limited number who arrive legally through legal routes. I have no issue with that.
Okay.
If you arrive
That's the answer to the question.
if you arrive illegally, or flip the question around, why are so many young British people leaving this social contract? 1 in 3 Gen Z want to live somewhere else. Why are they leaving? Why are the entrepreneurs leaving? Why are the prosperity? Why? I'll tell you why. Because this social contract, if you are a 25 to 35-year-old graduate in this country who wants a home and a family and a good job and a good life, this social contract makes no sense for you anymore. Because you are subsidizing partly people who are breaking our laws. You are subsidizing a system that doesn't work, and you are trying to compete in a housing market that is constantly blocking you from having any stake in this society. Now, that's the reality. Okay. That's why people are leaving for Dubai, for Italy, for Estonia. That's why our social contract is collapsing.
Hi, my name is Michael. I run Debate London, we're like a debate training foundation, and I find this debate really confusing because on one side we've got proposition who have kind of said that they're happy with a lower level of migration, which is not what we're really all here to talk about given the topic, but I appreciate why. And also we're kind of getting a lot of just diving into bias from opposition and just trying to appeal to your own crowd and not fully engaging what they've said. And I'm naturally kind of on your side, which has been quite annoying to watch. But one thing that I will say that has come up in this, and I would like to hear a bit more explained on, is from proposition, specifically Jonathan Ports, you mentioned specific industries where we have immigration that are subsidizing it for like care and how they are. But they're also industries that all of us recognize are universally underpaid. So care, NHS, teachers, all of these sectors are built upon because you have immigration, but it's also in part because there are people who are coming here who are able or don't have like legacy costs of living here, that we can then pay them less, and then that does cause wage suppression. As you have also said, as you've eroded their rights and other things, make it harder for them to move jobs, we naturally see that and how that affects everyone else. And so it's almost like an egg in the cart, or sorry, horse in the cart question, which is, because we're now seeing mass immigration into these sectors, my father saw it in the building trade as well, since the 70s. Where, is it horse and cart? Like, what are we seeing here? Because that is something that is actually impacting real people now. And I'd like you to engage with that as well, with the same kind of point from them.
Sorry, I was slightly confused by that. But let me try and answer what I think you were saying. Because it's not an unreasonable question. So on social care, for example, I've been very clear. Actually, it's the one thing which could, in principle, be good about the government's white paper, which is, I think, those of us on this side of the argument or commentators on the economists and people in Zoe's sector have said for a long time that, yes, it would be much better if we had proper pay, conditions, and training for people in the care sector. And if you did that, if the government were prepared to implement that and fund it, that would indeed, over time, lead to significantly lower demand for migrants from abroad to fill jobs which, as we've said, are indeed underpaid. I have no problem with that, and that's perfectly consistent with my general view that we should have an open, liberal, and flexible immigration system in general. However, that's not the case in other sectors. In the university sector, for example, immigrants come in and compete with my job. For my job, fine. I've lost jobs because immigrants got the job, fine. Is that bad for my wages? Absolutely not, because it's good for my sector. Our sector thrives on immigration, and there are a bunch of other sectors in the UK which do thrive on it. There's not a limited number of jobs to go around. There's not a limited amount of pay to go around. That's a basic economic fallacy. And overall, in sectors where the market broadly works, which is most of the economy, immigration is, on the whole, a positive for those sectors and not a negative for jobs and wages in the sectors. And we've got plenty of empirical evidence on that over the years. Indeed, the evidence, the Bank of England paper and the other papers that Matt was citing actually show that perfectly clearly if you bother to read them. And once again, I'm just going to note again that on average, migrants here are not, including recent migrants, are not on average low-skilled or low-paid. You can see it in the data. It's just not true. I can read out to you what the OI said.
John, you're literally just lying to people. You're not actually giving them an accurate view as to what the evidence is showing. You can go home tonight, you can download it for yourself, the OBR report, and you can read it for yourself.
Sorry, can I just come in on that?
This is why...
Wait, Matthew,
wait.
you just accused him of lying.
He just accused him of
Which
lying.
I would prefer...
He just accused me of lying. Here is... I've got the OBR report on my screen. The average earnings of migrants in the first year of arrival over this period are slightly higher than the UK average.
Over the course of their lifetime, John? Over the course of the lifetime.
Sorry?
Over the course of their lifetime.
So
the average of earnings in migrants in the first year of their lifetime, that's also true over the course of their lifetime.
This is exactly why people are losing trust in the expert class. I'm sorry. That's exactly why that's happening.
Matt, let's not make it personal. Each person is choosing the statistics to support their argument. It can be leveled in every direction. We are not making it personal. Can I go back to the gentleman who felt that his... Because the guy who asked the question that involved an egg and a cart and a horse and a...
Yeah, sorry. I rambled a bit. I get nervous with a mic.
No, absolutely. I honestly didn't mean that.
I hope I answered your question.
Did he answer your question?
You did start it, but I think one of the issues that I have with this topic is you are in a very high skilled sector. Like being in academic is very high skilled. And I think you see a lot more of that competition playing out. But then when you get into what we've been discussing here, which is much more, let's say, lower skilled, or where most people actually end up working, so that could be in, as you've seen, like care and healthcare is one of the largest employers in the UK. The labour sector in terms of building sites is also a very huge employer. These are much more competitive and where we see wage stagnation at a much higher rate. And so that's my question of where we're seeing it.
You're frustrated with this side of the
So I'm frustrated with this side of the argument. So Nadhim, you haven't added much in terms of like content. It's like, sorry, this isn't a conservative hustings.
Keep it polite, please.
Sorry,
I didn't expect to be going to the audience for this too.
No, sorry. But I'm saying that as someone who's on your side, like genuinely, I am of the position that I would like to see lower immigration numbers. My personal position, I would just like to have heard more. And it's not a personal attack when they come at you about when you bring that story in your opening speech. Pardon? Sorry. But that's just how that works.
Okay.
But I would like to hear more from Matt specifically about engaging with the topic of how we're seeing wages impacted in these sectors, like to kind of counter his point.
And I don't want to hear more. You can. You've got a right of reply, but I don't want to hear any more about people chucking stats around. Yeah. So thank you very much. Yeah. Go for it, Nadhim.
I think what we're trying to say on this side is let's get smart about immigration. I think actually stats are a good thing, right? The more we shine a light on not just the overall numbers, which what Jonathan tends to do, right? But let's get actually forensic about this. I talked about the different levels of earnings from Middle East, Africa, the difference between Spanish immigrants versus Bangladeshi and Pakistani immigration. I think if we're really going to be intelligent about the people that we welcome to our shores, that we want a dynamic economy, we want to see wealth creators, we want to see entrepreneurs returning to this country.
We're going to select certain nations and say,
yes, why
you're
not?
from Sierra Leone, you can come, you're from Gabon, you can't.
Whoa. We did it during the pandemic, right? We had countries that were safer than others, right? Why can't we be confident and say, this is the best country in the world to live in, we're going to choose who comes to these shores.
You're work shy, we don't want you.
No, but we also should have legitimate, to the lady here in the front, right, routes for asylum, for those fleeing persecution. That's different. So let's not conflate the two as the other side tries to. No, but that's where your question, that is where your question was heading. As if I am going to say to you, people who are being persecuted in Africa, we shouldn't allow it.
It wasn't. I was asking about people who wanted to come for work.
I'm saying to you, let's get smart. Maybe not nationality. Maybe we choose by profession. Maybe we choose by wealth creation.
It was just you were using nationalities earlier, so I was just trying to work out.
I was trying to answer the gentleman at the back, saying that I hadn't contributed much to the debate. I was trying to explain to him that actually, if we just reflect on what we're trying to do in this country, right? And not have a debate that is so fraught with emotion as if you bring up the subject of trying to control migration to this country, as Matthew's been doing for years, then you are a terrible human being. That's not true. Let's do the right thing. Other nations are doing it ahead of us, like Italy.
Do you think
in
there's a bit
Europe?
of
Not
projection
Singapore,
there?
not Dubai, Italy in Europe. And watch how successful Meloni will be.
But can I just ask you something? Because you will be aware, in a sense, given the local elections we've just had, given the pronouncements from the government, that this is kind of unusual, because you all pretty largely voted in favour of high immigration. And yet...
I don't think they did.
I know, I take your point. But I think you made the point. Their nerves, I think, are about what the alternative is. And I wonder, Matt, if you sometimes worry about the effects of your argument, because you can feel it in the room.
Okay, so can I take that point head on? Because
Please do.
the views that, let's say when Jonathan said, I support an open liberal migration policy, let's say something equivalent to a continuation of the status quo, that's a 10 to 15% position in this country if you look at the national polling. The vast majority of people in this country want to dramatically reduce immigration. I would even go so far as to suggest that this... I would go, indeed. Indeed. They're so desperate for change, they want to head over there. But the vast majority of people...
You're going home in a minute.
Want to lower migration considerably, and the polling this week suggests 85% would like it to be less than 100,000, roughly where it was when Tony Blair came to power in 1997. It was around 50,000. That's basically where the vast majority of people out there are. That's why Reform are winning the elections. That's why they're number one in the polls. That's why I would quietly
this is a
suggest...
answer to my question,
it's coming back to that. That's why I'd quietly suggest questions like, aren't you worried about your arguments being used by these people? I want to flip that.
It's the particular arguments you're using.
Sorry, I know what you're saying.
You're saying
Sarah,
certain nationality are racist, are rapists, or...
No, I have not said certain nationalities are rapists.
You have.
I have said, if I could...
Have.
Well, okay.
This is why nobody trusts the expert class.
Can I just repeat to you exactly what I said?
Oh, God. Oh, God. Do we have to hear it again?
Please do. Please do. They mean yes.
What I said, I was very clear with my language. Eritreans and Afghans are 20 times more likely to be convicted of sexual assault and rape in this country. Now, I'm sorry if you find that uncomfortable, but that is based, than British nationals. That is based on freedom of information requests from police authorities. I'm sorry if you struggle with that.
So I want to ask
that is the evidence.
Okay, so let's take that.
To answer Sarah's question, which I'm being prevented from answering, I'm not the radical extreme person in this room. The extreme people are those who have been imposing mass uncontrolled immigration on this country.
Now let me go to Zoe on this and then I will come to the question. Zoe, there is a stat, and I'm going to trust your stats.
Oh, I have no idea.
And if you trust a stat, and you know, we can put it through Verify, we can do whatever.
Listen, it sounds
Can
terrifying.
we not say it? Is there a problem with saying it?
I mean, who's silencing you? Who's imposing this on you? Once again, I'm being accused of pulling all sorts of strings that I promise you I have no access to. We're being told this by people who have a hell of a lot more power in society than I do. On that stat, I do take a lot of umbrage with Matt positioning himself as a defender of women, British women. Rape Crisis England and Wales has some myth-busting stats up on their website, and the one that strikes me every time is that 6 out of 7 rapes that take place in this country take place within the household and are perpetrated by somebody you know, probably somebody in your family. It's not something that I think is worth scoring cheap political points about. But I do worry that by positioning this story about migrants as rapists, we are actually making women and girls and children less safe by giving politicians a scapegoat to blame when really we need to address a very deep and dark and dangerous part of our society, which is sexual violence against women and how it really happens and what really goes on.
Sorry, I just want to say one very quick thing. I'm going to say one very quick thing.
I bet you are.
The argument that talking about those statistics and evidence is scapegoating and is, let's say, xenophobic and provocative, that is exactly the attitude that led to the cover-up of the rape gang scandal for 30 years. That's why we ended up in that problem.
Okay, let's get another question. I saw, who's got the microphone? Whoever's got the microphone, go ahead. Yes,
sorry.
Gentleman in the orangey shirt.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say, given that given that kind of the rights of women around the world are less well respected than maybe in the UK, you would expect to have different standards and treatments of women from groups of certain countries. So as Matt was saying, maybe like 55 out of 10,000, as far as convictions for rape of Eritreans and Afghanis. But if we take as read the argument that there is an economic benefit to having immigration, how much should we be getting per additional rape in this country?
What I might do is just leave that question there. Let's get another question. The lady in the purpley vest here. Thank you.
Wow.
Hi. I'd like to bring a point to this debate that hasn't been raised yet, which is...
It's very hard to hear you. I think you have to make it quite directional, so speaking like that.
Hi. I'd like to bring a point to this debate that hasn't been raised yet, which is the issue of brain drain. All of you have spoken about skilled migration, but if you are constantly taking the cream of countries like mine, Iraq, like Afghanistan, or if you're taking highly skilled migrants from those countries, who's actually going to lead those countries on their journey into modernity? I work with the American University in Baghdad, and we constantly leading projects in order to enable highly qualified Iraqis to return to Iraq to rebuild it. So if you're constantly arguing in favor of skilled migration, you're not helping those countries on their journey to development.
Okay,
raising this point.
Nadhim. Another chance to contribute to the debate.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And my colleague Andrew Mitchell actually has been a great advocate that by us simply making it much easier and draining those nations of talent is in itself a terrible strategy and a terrible policy. It's why I said earlier, and we didn't have enough time tonight, and I wish we had another hour, that if you look at anything, Libya and south of that, there's 500 million people that are going to come under pressure. Wouldn't it be better if we learn from what has worked in Africa, in the Middle East? There are many countries, by the way, that are doing incredible work in creating prosperity, not just deadly aid, i.e. keep those people downtrodden and just keep throwing superficial aid at them, but actually build economies, empower people to start businesses, SMEs, micro businesses. That is a smart way of working upstream to make sure those countries prosper. The strategy we're on at the moment actually is self-harming Britain and those nations. So I applaud you for the work that you do.
I'm so sorry. We are up against it time-wise. We're going to have closing statements. What I am going to remind you, though, because we're going to have a vote after the closing statements, the Wi-Fi code for the final vote is 2025, RGS May, M-A-Y. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask our speakers, you've got 1 to 2 minutes, ideally 1, because I've blown timings. And Matt Goodwin, do stay where you are. Would you like to give us sort of summing up your thoughts on to end the debate?
Sure. So what we're seeing in this country at the moment is a watershed moment in the immigration debate. Even a Labour Prime Minister, because the evidence that I've discussed has become so overwhelming, even Keir Starmer and government insiders have conceded that this political project, this set of political choices, which is exactly what it is, it's a set of political choices, it's not inevitable, is not working for the country. Immigration is now the #1 issue in Britain ahead of the economy. It's why, unless the polling changes, Nigel Farage and the Reform Party will win the next general election. So I would just leave a challenge hanging over everybody. If you've listened to everything that I've said and Nadhim has said tonight, and you've laughed and disagreed instantly and not given it consideration, that's exactly why you're seeing this political change in this country. That's exactly why you feel as though the people around you are moving away from you and the country is being overturned. You're supposed to really engage with what the research and evidence is showing about how mass uncontrolled immigration is changing this country. And the reality is the elite class are not paying the cost of this experiment. It is ordinary, average, hard-working, law-abiding people who are having to live next to houses of HMOs, housing for multiple occupancy, 20 to 30, usually undocumented young men living in one house in Runcorn, which I visited 2 weeks ago. A young woman saying she can't let her kids play in the playground because she feels they're no longer safe. When I suggest to you evidence that has been drawn from freedom of information requests, ask yourself, why is the police not releasing that data to you taxpayers? Why is the state not releasing that data to you? Why are you not being told the truth about what is happening in your country? If you're so confident about this experiment, why are they not giving you that information? You have to really think about that. The answer, I think, is because they know what I've been trying to say to you. This experiment is making you poorer, more divided, and less safe. Thank you very much.
Zoe Gardner.
Thank you. There's been so much said tonight, and once again, we've never had enough time to get through it all. I do urge you to think about what is coming and look across to the United States, to Trump's America. I do think that he won off the back of telling stories about migrants, connecting them to the most heinous crimes, that too many people in America brought the idea that migrants were rapists and gang members, because that's what he went out on the campaign trail and said over and over again. If you wonder how on earth did they get there, it's because people who didn't think that that was the right way to talk about it didn't do enough to demand that we actually address the inequality, safety for women and children, and do it in a way that rejects the idea that you are more likely to commit any kind of a crime because of where you were born, or the color of your skin, or your nationality, or your religion. I want to quote another Tory MP very briefly now, from 1905, Sir William Marriott, who went into the slums of the East End that had been swamped by degenerate, destitute immigrants. He said, "There are some streets you may go through and hardly know you are in England." And that's a very gentle one of these quotes. That was in 1905, and he was talking about Jewish immigrants in the East End. He was quoted in a book that I'm reading, which is about Commonwealth immigration, and he was comparing that sentiment, which was expressed again after the Second World War, about Commonwealth immigrants who came here. Those people's children and their children's children are British, they belong. That every single time there is a new wave of immigration, there will be a firebrand politician telling you this one is the one to bring those rivers of blood. Let's not let them.
Nadhim Zahawi.
Thank you, Sarah. I want you, before you vote tonight, to think about uncontrolled high immigration. And is that good for our country? Britain, today, my friends, is the least automated economy in the OECD, with fewer, just think about this for a second, with fewer automatic car washes than 20 years ago. Right? Why? Why has that happened? Because of low-skilled labor, uncontrolled high immigration. So what has high immigration done for Britain? It's made us, in my view, less safe, less sure of our own history, and of course, of our values. It's important the sort of backward ideas that are not just unpleasant, but are downright dangerous. It's why Matt is right when he says 85% of the nation are with this side of the argument. It's made us poorer and stuck in smaller houses. It even means we have fewer cool robots instead of people washing our cars. And if none of that convinces you and you don't like me, just remember, it's also brought me to this country. Thank you for letting me make this case, and vote with us this evening.
And finally, Jonathan Portes.
Okay. Thank you. I'll be very brief because, I think what we've seen here is really the lack of substance, evidence, data, facts on the side. Nadhim talks about us being less integrated. We have lots of evidence on this. We are a less segregated country. We are a less racist country. We're a more comfortable country with our neighbors, particularly those of different backgrounds, different sexualities, different ways of living than we were 20 years ago. That isn't because of immigration. It's because, or at least not just because of immigration, it's because we have, in that way, become a better country. The idea that Britain is broken and it's immigration that broke it is one that is wrong morally, it's wrong politically, and it's wrong on the facts.
Please do make an effort to vote now. We know how important it is to vote. I'm going to, just to sum up, while you're doing that, that'll take you to the vote. We'll get see if your perspective has changed at all. I would say from the hands up, would you agree? I don't know if you, well, we all saw it, about 60% in favour, maybe a bit more, 10% against, and 30% undecided. That would be my assessment of the room. So let us see now. I'm assuming you've all voted, and I'm assuming I'm going to get an answer. Maybe not. This is the problem. We need people doing it, don't we? Not the robots cleaning the cars. There's a problem with the technology. Oh, is yours working? Amazing. Why isn't mine? Oh, no, it's not. Oh, yes, it is. Okay, it is. Sorry, let me go back and let's try that again in a second. So, thank you so much. It's just gone. No, it's back. Now it's back. Here we are. Well, the don't knows have sorted themselves out. But which way do you think they kind of? I would say they landed probably a bit of both. This is not right. Sorry. That's not right. What does yours say? Here, somebody else come and. 65% in favour. 66%. Tell me. You tell us. What's the next one? Who's against? 21. 21 and 18. 30. 14. Okay. So the don't knows didn't sort themselves out. So that sounds to me like pretty much it was at the beginning. Did anybody change their mind? Hands up. Hey, oh, gentlemen here.
One person.
One person.
Did we lose you?
You should give him a free ticket
Two
to the next
people.
one.
Not even going to ask you which way you went. I'm going to say, Jonathan Portes, Zoe Gardner, Nadhim Zahawi, Matt Goodwin, thank you all very much. And thank you for bearing with us with the technology and for your fascinating good questions.